At that point, I was like, holy smokes. Extraordinary business value.
All right, Ricky, we're live. Thank you. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks to our listeners for joining us. I met you at the AIMUG meetup, and I think it was this Christmas that we started talking about AI in respect to consciousness, and I thought that we would be having a good conversation about that. It'd be great to capture that here. Before we do that, could you introduce yourself? Tell us how you got to Austin, if you're a native, how you got into AI, LangChain, how you joined the meetup. It'd be very interesting to find out what you're doing. So take it away.
Yeah, thank you, James. Thanks for having me. So I came to Austin about 5 years ago. It was right before COVID happened, actually. Before that, I was living in Connecticut for a couple of years, but I really grew up in Texas for most of my life. I'm from Italy, so I moved to the U.S. when I was 10 years old, moved to Louisiana, and then grew up in Houston. To high school there, went to college there, and I got a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. And I think it was around 2020, I started having more of an interest in coding. I wanted to learn how to code, wanted to get my hands on just learning how to build stuff with code. I think 2020 was, it was sort of, you couldn't ignore that technology was going to have a profound change in our lives. At that point, I remember Zoom sort of just popping out of nowhere. It was built super fast and adapted to the needs of the time when people were more or less quarantining. It was around, I was working manufacturing in Connecticut. I got my first job out of college working aerospace contract manufacturer. We were making like these turbine vanes and blades that went on Pratt and Whitney engines.
This is actually so funny because that was one of my first jobs was manufacturing vanes for the F-35 replacement engine
Yeah.
from GE Aviation. And so, was this for Pratt and Whitney?
Yeah, Pratt and Whitney was one of we were contracting with them. There was another customer we had was actually GE. So yeah, more vanes and blades what probably were made for the F-35. It was interesting material to work with. We were doing mostly like grinding operations and EDM, like with a wire cutter to dipped in like
very, very fine
water.
tolerances.
Yeah, exactly. So I was actually programming. That's kind of where my programming experience started, programming the EDM machines with the G code.
Okay. But this is like G code, if anybody hasn't been familiar with it, it's like a very, very old coding language. It's really just a series of descriptions and coordinate spaces to tell machines where to move the machine head, RPMs to turn, other various little switches like run coolant, that kind of thing. So, like, how did you go from G code to, let's say, Python, or are you doing TypeScript, or I don't know what your current stack is?
Yeah, so in 2021, I applied to a coding bootcamp when those were still a thing. I don't know nowadays, but it was a JavaScript bootcamp with Hack Reactor. They may still be around, I'm not sure. It was supposed to be an 8-month long bootcamp that was, I think it was like a couple hours every night. So it was like evening classes. And I was learning essentially JavaScript and web development without really knowing what that entailed. That's where I gained my initial skills in programming, and I started to get a better picture of back-end, front-end systems, script. At the same time, I got a job at Applied Materials. It was remote at the time, so it was pretty easy to do my job and then learn code in my evenings. And
how did you get from JavaScript to like Python?
So actually, Python, I got into it working at my job at Applied Materials. So it's still currently my job. I was a contractor at the time, but I got hired full time ever since. And we were working a lot with these build materials for essentially these like where used bill of materials, where just to know, okay, like we have these parts. They could be like throttle valves, they could be controllers that go inside of some of our products across multiple business units. And my job is essentially in obsolescence, which is basically more or less project managing part changes. And in semiconductors, part changes are super complex because they go into this complicated life cycle of qualifying a new part, meeting customer requirements, and sometimes because we know that the new solution is going to work in our product, but then customers have stricter requirements that they make it sort of implicit. They try to squeeze a little bit more out of the spec, and that then causes us to have to go back to the supplier, get some update on it, and it just takes forever to do so. But the initial challenge was data, right? I realized early on that our company just lacked data intelligence. And you had all these people working on these projects that were not really making data-driven decisions. And when they tried to do that, it was a very, very manual process. So it was around the time I graduated from bootcamp, and I realized, wait, like I can automate this. And I started making tools for myself to help me out in my projects. And that's where Python was purely self-learning for that purpose. So it actually got me hired then because I think the leadership noticed that it was useful. It was making our team more efficient. And ever since, I've been building tools and sharing them with my team to use.
And so at what point did AI come into the mix?
Really, it came to the mix earlier this year, June. But I was using ChatGPT way before that. Honestly, ChatGPT taught me a lot of Python. And it was not as efficient to make these tools because I was manually coding everything, which just seems so weird now to actually type code because I don't do it anymore. I don't know anyone that does it. But I think when I first started using AI assisted coding, like how we know it today with Cursor and Claude Code, it was with what's today known as Klein, but I think before it was known as was it Klein Code?
Right. Yeah. But it's interesting that in enterprise there are people who are still users of Klein because it's very they have very long approval processes. So like it's very hard for them to keep at the forefront. So I've seen people continue to use Klein.
Yeah, it was called Claude Dev. But I started using it as Klein when it was an extension you could download on VS Code, and I was still using VS Code as my IDE. Now I use Cursor, but when I first heard about it was at MLOps last year, and I saw Colin using it and building some front end code. I was like, what? You could just see code being built in your IDE with the diffs of what's being removed, what's being added, and I was just like, my mind was blown. And I started using it ever since. It was more expensive at the time. I feel like models have become less expensive now, and people generally use subscriptions. Like I have a Claude Code subscription because I'm such a heavy user of it. I make good use of it, but yeah, it's been a journey in that regard. In the enterprise, yeah, go ahead.
So how did the consciousness come into it? So, I mean, that's what I remember. What I think even before this discussion at our Christmas meetup, we had you talking about consciousness and AI coming together. Like, first of all, I want to know, like, how did you get so interested in this? And like, what even is consciousness? Because I've heard like 10, 20 different definitions.
Yeah. So where does it come from? For me, I think it's the same thing that sparks everything, and that's pain. Having a problem that feels so impossible to solve. And then some new technology comes in and it gives you high hopes that you can actually do the impossible. It was mostly on my job. But I started, I think it was around May or June, and I I got this voice mode MCP. I don't know if you heard of it. Essentially, it made it so I could talk to my models in whatever IDE was using, just Claude code at a time. I'm still using it. And I realized I could just have a voice conversation with my models, and it just completely blew my mind. And I started thinking, we're running 300,000-year-old cognitive software in an exponential information environment. And the only way that I can actually, learn and keep up with things is if I can just talk to my models and my agents and have a real-time voice conversation to brainstorm things, to build things. And it just increases the time. It decreases the time it takes to get to an idea point, to a sort of epiphany of where you're going to build, how you're going to solve the problem. And when I realized that I could actually make it portable was when I was driving to Houston to see my family, and I plugged in my MacBook over Bluetooth in my car. And I was talking to Claude over my car's Bluetooth system, working on a project over my drive. And I was like, okay, so I sort of see a pattern here. Right now, I'm grounded in, I have to plug in this thing to my car speaker. I could definitely make this work in the cloud.
So is the idea here that it's like a multiplication of your own consciousness that, used to be that you would have to dedicate all of your attention to coding, or in this case, to driving. And now you are able to sort of offload your cognition to the agent.
Right. And that's what makes it less painful.
I think what's interesting here is that it sort of lines up with like sociology in a way, or sort of like, I don't know, you could say like corporate dynamics, because you have, let's say, a whole bunch of people who join a corporation and they have to complete the vision of the leadership. And are they simply extensions of the consciousness of the leadership?
The user is the leader in this case.
Yeah. In this case, it's you're the leadership and the Claude code is the employee. But I'm wondering, like, is this your own consciousness or is it the AI's consciousness? Or conversely, are employees the consciousness of their employer?
I think it's an extension of your own. The question, I think, is more about ownership than anything else. Do you own your models? Because if you do, then you own your own intelligence. You can train your models to do, whatever, to prioritize whatever, to have this constitutional component to it, baked in the weights. And that actually made me think. I ask myself this a lot. So is the model making decisions for me, or am I in control here? And the answer is, I think right now it's a little bit of both. You can't deny that you're not fully in control, because you don't own the model. So I'm using Anthropic right now. I'm using Claude Code, and they have this constitutional AI baked in the weights, which sort of prevents Opus, in case for Claude Sonnet, to do certain things. If you ask it to, hey, help me launch a DDoS attack on this person, it's going to be like, no.
No, it won't do. But if you go to Venice.ai, they'll help you launch a DDoS attack.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Venice is anonymized and jailbroken models, so you can use those.
But I
Yeah.
mean, in the DDoS attack, question, I mean, that sort of seems like an obvious thing. I mean, I'm a corporation and I'm having like, a multi-tenant system, like using my AI. If they do bad things with it, then I'm sort of responsible. But it's like, well, it's like this now, but moving forward, what else are you going to bake into the weights that are going to sort of make the experience or the outcomes that the users are looking for not aligned with what they actually want? And
Or
so
even more nefarious, like it nudges the users along with fake information.
the problem is that you don't have control over it. And that's what is scary in a way.
Yeah.
I think that we can leverage these cloud models um, that you could definitely never run on your own hardware. Even with the NVIDIA Spark or the new GPUs that are coming out, they're just too big. And I think we'll get to that point of being able to run edge AI on our own hardware. Most people are probably not going to bother with it, but we can leverage these cloud models we currently have to build that infrastructure ourselves. If you don't do that, I think you're doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah. There already has been edge models that have been created for other domains. I know, for example, TensorFlow has a version of its library, which I believe a lot of the models are quantized and shrunk for edge cases, not edge cases, but for being out of network. So you can put them on robots that are in the middle of nowhere, or put them in Internet of Things situations where maybe the wireless or internet is only sparsely connected. So you can have models being run on the parking meter if you need it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think going forward is definitely going to be the case. And it did seem like more and more of the models are going to be specialized and smaller weight, rather than having these large general models that we tend to rely on today.
Yeah. And there's several problems that come with that. I think the interesting thing with you think about extending your consciousness to AI, it's like, how does that scale? Um, if I can create maybe an agent that can create other agents sort of on the fly as my problems evolve, um, that's sort of where I see this going. We're at the point where we can manufacture intelligence, but then to make it portable, you need a runtime, and it needs to live in some server that would be long running, um, or maybe multiple servers. You can make it distributed. The scale component, I think it's something that a lot of people are trying to solve right now with the runtimes. I don't think we're at the point where we have sort of figure out distributed intelligence just yet. Because then it's one thing to have an agent and specialize on something, but then it's another thing to have a team of agents working together to solve more complex problems. I think we're
Yeah,
going to see that.
Yeah, there's that component, I think, with A to A, agent to agent, and then there's, I forget the protocol, but there's a protocol for payments between agents. So you could have distributed cognition or distributed agents working that way, where, you just buy the specialization of other agents to solve particular problems.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the first sort of attempt at this that I saw was in Claude Flow. Have you checked out that repo on GitHub?
Is that the one with the swarms? So you can
Yeah.
have a swarm of AIs?
Yeah. I think they had this concept of this hive mind where you have agents sort of being orchestrated from an orchestrator that they're calling a queen. And they had a fault tolerance component to it where agents were writing, communicating with one another on some persistent state. That's still, it's not very fault tolerant. It sort of misses the point because you would need this, WebSocket connection for agents to be able to talk to each other, especially like sub agents. Because like right now in Claude Code, if I launch a session and I start talking to Opus and I ask it to launch a sub agent or like multiple sub agents, the sub agents won't be able to talk to each other. All they know is, this is what I'm doing. They have no context of talking to other agents or sub agents. They don't even know the other sub agents are running. And I think that's sort of, it's going to be the next step in agent development.
Didn't they do something very similar to that?
Oh, interesting.
Right? They just like had an orchestrator, like they had a manager and he had a bunch of sub agents and the sub agents could communicate with each other.
I didn't know that. If Crew AI sort of solved that.
I don't know if they solved it. I mean, it's an implementation. I tried
Yeah.
Crew AI. Not as straightforward, or it's not easy to conceptualize like I think LangChain is. So, I mean, it's something I could go back to. I don't know if you've tried this sort of swarming the agents, but I found it very difficult when I was doing that.
Yeah. It is difficult because goes back to that question of consciousness. It's like I think humans are very single threaded like organisms in a way. We work in teams, we work with each other. But this whole concept of having like a distributed network of people being in sync, coordinating one another, it's impossible. Like even if we have telephones, messaging systems, that perfect level of coordination doesn't exist in our human world.
Isn't consciousness just a single thread? I mean, and omniscience is the ability to observe other threads, right? So, like, I mean, we split up, right? You can have multiple threads on a processor, but really, like, each thread is its own kind of thought. They're not really communicating with each other. It comes back together at the end. It's sort of like a ghost or a temporary clone of cognition that gets booted up to solve the problem. But ultimately, you can't have more than one thought and awareness of all those thoughts at a time. Like there is singular attention to a thread. And so this sort of like multi-attention, multi-thread, I think is something that, I mean, I don't think any human or any living animal has that capacity. I mean, we kind of do, but we're not conscious of it because we are aware of our own bodily functions, right? At some level, like I'm digesting something at this moment. You are, we're talking. I don't have to tell myself to breathe, neither do you. And so, like, there is sort of this awareness, but it's not with my attention. Like, my attention is a single thread. It's what's occurring in my conscious thought. And, I don't know whether or not having attention across simultaneous consciousness is possible. There's telemetry, right?
I feel,
Maybe if we get telemetry.
I feel like though in nature you have instances where like ant colonies, right? If you like look at ants like working together, they're just in sync. Like they just know what to do and they're achieving like one common purpose, all doing one thing. Bees sort of work the same way.
Humans do that too. I mean, but we don't do it through, I think it's olfactory glands, right? They have particular smell that's left, and you can kind of communicate. The way I view that is like emotion. Like they kind of are operating on a hive emotion, and
Yeah.
that kind of influence the individual like cognition of each ant or each bee. And I think that happens also at the human level. I think that you can have, for example, emotion spread through media, speeches, that kind of thing, and it can affect everybody's cognition. And you're kind of functioning as a hive mind in that case. You see someone else, you have empathy towards like whatever sort of state of mood that they're in, and affects your own cognition in that way too. So there is some sort of hive mind that occurs even in humans.
Right. And
But it's not, I don't think, I mean, I don't know if I've ever been fully aware of that. I don't think I'm fully aware of when that happens, but I can observe it happening for other people, but I don't know whether or not they're aware of that happening too.
Yeah, I know it's interesting, but I think the part that interests me most, it's like there's probably different levels of abstraction when it comes to agent development. I think what interests me most is like, what's the right cognitive architecture here for the system that I'm building, the right communication protocols for working with my agents. Um, I feel like as engineers, developers alike, but even non-developers, we're as humans really we're going to be thinking a lot more on the overall system, how it works, how it operates, how it communicates, and how we communicate to it. If I'm trying to take my agent system um, on the cloud, um, would I then be talking in voice mode? Would I be talking to just one of my agents? Could I have maybe a Zoom meeting where there's a bunch of different agents that specialize in different things and we're all just talking together and brainstorming? It opens up interesting possibilities of working with your agents and probably the speed of execution and the different technologies that can emerge from it.
It is interesting. So, like, I think we kind of talked about the cognition of the agent itself, the sort of multiplicity of consciousness that you can have, how maybe emotions are sort of a hive mind in humans and other animals, and that might be something that can be replicated inside agentic systems. I want to move forward to another area that you mentioned, which was the effect of these systems on the consciousness of the user. So we were speaking previously with Sam about people using AI to become more authentic or to achieve more in life that maybe they couldn't achieve necessarily on their own in their particular station. Could you expand on that? Like, how would you view it? How has AI expanded your own consciousness?
So I think that we're at the point where we can build these systems with AI and sort of have a goal to maybe embody a certain type of consciousness ourselves and have this like artificial feedback loop happening, to purposely guide the way you think. Up until now, we've been trying to do the same thing, with books. It's like, why you read a book? Because you're interested in the knowledge in the book. You want it to be part of yourself. And when you read it and you understand it, then you become a different person after that. Um, so we could sort of accelerate that with maybe an agent that I'm talking with in voice. I'm talking to it about a specific problem, how to think about politics, how to think about life, and it's sort of coaching me in at the same time.
So my daughter uses this AI called Synthesis to learn mathematics. I think it came out of maybe SpaceX engineers worked on it. I do know this program itself is an AI agent and it gamifies the lesson. So it taught her counting originally, then addition, subtraction, multiplication. And each one is centered around some sort of game. And what it's able to do is modify the lesson and attack her particular misunderstanding of the concept so that she can learn the material and then also do the repetition so that it gets like ingrained. I like how you brought up a novel and how this might be like a new means of knowledge acquisition, like how the novel was novel and came out and it was this new technology for people to learn new material. And I think that what worries me with AI is that it's too quick right now, that definitely needs some sort of guidance. It needs to be adapted to human limitations. Because what's great about novels is that you can take them slowly, you can absorb them as you read, and it's not a fast conversation. Like if I open up my chat GPT app and I start having a conversation with it, guaranteed like 20 minutes after I've had the conversation, I will forget what it talked about with the app. So that's definitely something that I think needs development. And at least there are people, for example, the synthesis team, that are actively pursuing that, at least for K through 12 education.
That's interesting. Something that sparked this idea, I built this project called Greenlights AI. When I started thinking about, hey, what if I could just tell about of my agents, like about all my books on my bookshelf, and I could sort of ask questions about what does this mean about me, like what about my interests, about my personality, and like what I value about things. So I tried to learn more about myself. It was interesting because sort of the same time when I was having these kind of ideas, I saw a podcast in Joe Rogan with Matthew McConaughey talking about this. McConaughey was like, I want a personal LLM that I can just like tell it all about my books and ask questions. Right after that, I built Greenlights AI for this, just on GitHub, collecting dust, but it was a concept that I experimented with.
Wow. So, there's this concept of coaching, right? Psychiatrists have their own sort of application where they try to get people who are experiencing very distressing issues back to normal. But then there's this idea of coaching, which is you take people who are otherwise normal and you try to get them to perform at their peak. And I was wondering whether or not this app that you've built is sort of like that. You're trying to like look at yourself, look at the books. You're interested in Joe Rogan podcasts. And I think a lot of people who are reading books, listening to podcasts, they're trying to better themselves through acquisition of like new ideas and new practices if they put the books into practice. And it'd be very interesting to actually have an LLM that just is your own personal wellness coach or psychological coach and just knows your faults, knows your strengths, and knows, sort of the path to get you from where you are to where you want to be. I mean, there's tons of people who are top performers who have a weekly check-in call with a coach just to, make sure that they're up to snuff so that they can perform at their peak, because being at the pinnacle is not normal. It's not normal for humans to be that way. So if you want to be that, you have to have some help.
Yeah. And that opens up really interesting possibilities in the field of science. It's like cybernetics, where like, what if you have we have these health sensors, like the Aura rings or like Garmin watches, Apple watches that are just collecting bio health information on yourself. Could you maybe feedback that information to an agent that's analyzing your health metrics and sort of maybe tweaking the environment around you, lights, ordering groceries for you? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, so there's this idea of like eustress, we are anti-fragile creatures. So in other words, we become stronger when we experience stress, when we experience hardship. And I'm a little bit worried about having an AI pamper me throughout the whole day, because I have a feeling that what would happen is that, I develop a whole bunch of neuroses, become very weak, start to forget how to do things that I take for granted now. So, I think that LLMs are really great in that they can perhaps do some of the upper level things, but I get worried when we start trying to get them to do basic tasks.
Yeah. And it's understandable because I think the entire 20th century, it's been very agency focused for people. I mean, even before that, it's like people have always done things. And now we have these agents sort of doing that for us. So then it's like, what does that mean for us? What's our place in the world? I think it just means that you get to be more human.
Consciousness vacuums, they're vacuuming our consciousness out and storing it all for themselves. And we're just
Yeah.
here pressing go.
Well, depends on what that thing is, like if I have maybe an agent that is in charge of my relationships and to, message people to make them just feel good, to make them think, I don't know, maybe it's like me talking to them, because I just don't want to deal with it, then that becomes a little bit less human. It doesn't seem like a good use case for having agents to manage your own personal relationships with people. But if it's for work, if it's something where I'm monetizing on it or my health is dependent on it, I think it's a good outsourcing of the agency. The purpose is to make me better. So then I can focus on maybe taking a hike, things that right now I feel like I can't do as much because I'm so overloaded with work. So I think there's definitely a need.
Be very interesting to see. So have you come up with any AI agents that you're regularly using in your day-to-day life to sort of like offload your consciousness and have more time?
I started doing that and I think it failed. And
Oh, tell me more.
well, the reason why I think it failed is because having a system that you can adapt, that you can expand, it's a much harder problem to solve than building a system that solves one specific problem. I think a lot of people have this tendency, I definitely have it, to solve all my problems. It's complex. And that's why I started working on this project called AI Mission Command, where I could essentially have a cloud runtime with my agents that I can communicate with through a web app over voice to orchestrate other agents or build other agents on demand to integrate in my infrastructure. One very good example of a company that's been leading in forefront of this has been Toyota. I saw at a conference, I went to a conference at MLOps this year in Austin where they had their ML team speaking, and they essentially were using LangGraph. They had their whole data infrastructure connected to agents that could create other agents on demand from factory floor operators through an edge service where they could talk to an agent, tell them about the problem they were having, and then that agent would create another agent from a config file. And that just completely blew my mind, because that is sort of like a manufacturing paradigm of going from nothing to something in just like as little time as possible, and you're already putting it in use and it works. I think that's the goal that I'm driving towards, having that kind of system in my personal life.
Yeah. Man, okay. So these are little factories for agents. And then, okay. So then, I mean, are you like, have you started playing around with it?
Yeah, I tried building it. It was way too complex, the way I made it, because you can sort of only really build it right now with cloud models, right? With like using like my Anthropic and Claude Code subscription, I can use the Claude agent SDK to build agents that I can just run on the cloud for my own self use, right? But long term, that's not something that I think is going to really work. The architecture has to be, you have to have some kind of, kernel, a core piece to it that you get to define sort of what matters to you. Then you can just sort of make these adapters to it and connect it to your infrastructure right away. That's what it is the hard piece to it. And when I tried building this, I wasn't very knowledgeable of like building. Every time I tried to build an architecture, like some kind of backend system, I think I see this pattern more nowadays. I started understanding it more myself. In a monolith, you're essentially trying to build these ports and adapters system. Ports are essentially like the contract that define how these different adapters that you may build would plug into your system. And I started doing it, but it was way too complex and I had to strip it down a little bit. Other life things happened, so I didn't work on it a lot more, but I have a good concept of how I'm going to build it moving forward.
So this consciousness expansion is more about adding like threads and getting more done and being more in charge of like the effect that your own like human consciousness has, and like you're sort of expanding the power in a way and the presence as well. So you're also having agents that can run, while you're sleeping, while you're inattentive, while you're distracted or doing other things. And so I think we went through the gamut, and we also kind of touched on maybe the sort of esoteric or particular cases of consciousness for like bees and humans and ants. And I was wondering, where can people find you, and where should people go to know what you're doing?
I should make what I'm doing more public. It's something I'm working on right now. I have a Twitter if people want to find me there. Also LinkedIn. There's probably a bunch of messages in my inbox that haven't checked in a while. Yeah, LinkedIn and Twitter are two good places. Also GitHub.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ricky. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Likewise.